The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Cedar Ridge, a town that seemed to have been forgotten by time and progress. Red dust swirled in small devils whenever the wind picked up, coating everything in a fine layer of grit that no amount of sweeping could ever fully remove. The buildings, weathered by countless seasons of scorching heat and bitter cold, leaned against each other like tired old men sharing the burden of existence. Sarah Mitchell clutched her 18-month-old daughter Emma closer to her chest as she stood before the general store's entrance. The child's weight had grown heavier throughout the day, not from any physical change, but from the accumulating rejections that pressed down upon Sarah's shoulders. Her black mourning dress, now faded to a dusty charcoal, marked her as a widow, a status that in this unforgiving land meant vulnerability, meant being prey. "I'm a hard worker, Mr. Garrett," she said to the store owner, trying to keep the desperation from creeping into her voice. "I can sweep, stock shelves, keep accounts. I learned my letters and numbers back in Ohio." The portly man didn't even look up from his ledger. "Already told you, Mrs. Mitchell. Can't have no widow with a baby working here. It ain't proper. Besides, that young'un would be getting into everything, disturbing the customers." "She's a quiet child, sir. She won't be any trouble, I promise." "The answer's no. Now, if you'll excuse me, I got real customers to tend to." Sarah's cheeks burned with humiliation as she turned away, the bell above the door mocking her with its cheerful tinkle. Outside, the October wind had picked up, carrying with it the promise of an early winter. Emma whimpered against her mother's shoulder, sensing the distress that radiated from every fiber of Sarah's being. This had been the 5th rejection of the day. The boarding house needed no help. The saloon, well, they'd made it clear what kind of work they'd offer a young widow, and Sarah had fled before the leering proprietor could finish his proposition. The hotel had taken one look at Emma and shaken their heads. Even the church, where she'd hoped Christian charity might prevail, had gently but firmly suggested she might find better prospects in the next town over. But Sarah had no money for the next town over. She had exactly $3.47 to her name, the last of what she'd gotten from selling their meager possessions after Thomas had died of fever 3 months ago. Their small farm had been seized by the bank within weeks. Thomas had borrowed against it for seed that never grew in the drought-stricken soil. The sun was sinking lower now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if Sarah had any capacity left to appreciate beauty. Emma began to cry in earnest now, the thin wail of a hungry child. Sarah's own stomach had been empty since yesterday, but that pain was nothing compared to the ache of being unable to properly feed her daughter. She stumbled toward the abandoned warehouse at the edge of town, its broken windows and sagging roof offering at least some shelter from the wind. Other transients had used it before. She could see the remains of old campfires and scattered debris, but it was empty now, and that was all that mattered. Sarah sank down against a relatively stable-looking wall, pulling her thin shawl around both herself and Emma. The baby's cries had softened to hiccuping sobs, her small face red and pinched with cold and hunger. Sarah rocked her gently, humming a lullaby her own mother had sung years ago, before cholera had taken her too. "Shh, my little one," she whispered, her voice breaking. Tears rolled down her cheeks, leaving clean tracks through the dust. "Mama's here. Mama's going to take care of you." But how? The question echoed in the empty space, unanswered and unanswerable. She'd been so certain she could make it work, could provide for Emma on her own. She was educated, willing to work, had always been told she was resourceful, but none of that mattered in a world that saw a husbandless woman with a child as little better than damaged goods. "My little one don't cost much to feed," she murmured through her tears. The words meant for God, for Thomas, for anyone who might be listening. Just a little milk, a little bread, that's all. She don't cost much at all. The wind picked up again, whistling through the gaps in the walls. Sarah pulled Emma tighter, trying to share what little warmth her body could generate. The baby had gone quiet now. That terrible quiet of a child who had learned crying brought no relief. That's how Jake Coleman found them. He'd been riding back to his ranch after delivering cattle to the railroad depot 2 towns over. The money in his saddlebags would see him through winter and then some. But profit was the furthest thing from his mind as he guided his horse down Cedar Ridge's main street. He was bone-tired, dust-covered, and wanted nothing more than to get back to his ranch, tend to his horse, and fall into his solitary bed. But something made him glance toward the old warehouse. Maybe the faint sound of a woman's voice, or maybe just the instinct honed by years of living in a land where danger could come from any direction. He almost rode on. It wasn't his business. The town had its share of drifters and down-on-their-luck folks. He couldn't save them all. Hell, most days he could barely save himself. Yet he found himself dismounting, his spurs jangling in the quiet evening air. Through a gap in the warehouse wall, he could see them, a woman in widow's weeds, holding a baby, both of them shivering in the cold. The woman was talking softly, and though he couldn't make out all the words, one phrase carried clear: "My little one don't cost much to feed." Something twisted in Jake's chest, a feeling he'd thought long dead. He'd built his life around being alone, around needing no one and having no one need him. It was safer that way, cleaner. But the sight of that woman and child, huddled against the coming night, broke through his carefully constructed walls. He walked back to his horse, pulling his bedroll and the package of food he'd bought for the journey home. Nothing fancy, some jerky, hardtack, a can of peaches he'd bought on impulse. He added his spare blanket, the thick wool one he kept for emergencies. Jake approached the warehouse entrance slowly, not wanting to startle them. The woman looked up as his shadow fell across the doorway, fear flashing in her eyes before being replaced by a weary resignation. She pulled the child closer, as if preparing to run, though Jake could see she had nowhere near the strength for it. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 25, with dark hair escaping from beneath a bonnet that had seen better days. The baby, a little girl, he thought, peered at him with solemn blue eyes. He set the supplies down carefully, close enough for her to reach but far enough that she wouldn't feel trapped. "Figured you might could use these." The woman stared at the offerings as if they might disappear. I can't pay you. Didn't ask you to." Jake's voice came out rougher than he'd intended. He cleared his throat, tried again. Well, it's getting cold. That little one needs something warm." He turned to go, uncomfortable with the gratitude swimming in her eyes, with the way the baby watched him with curious innocence. But the woman's voice stopped him. "Thank you," she whispered. "God bless you, sir." Jake nodded once and strode back to his horse, mounting quickly. As he rode out of town, he told himself he'd done his good deed. He'd helped them through the night. Come morning, the woman would find somewhere to go, someone to take her in. It wasn't his problem. But 5 miles down the trail, with his ranch in sight and the evening star rising bright above the mesa, Jake found himself turning his horse around. The image of that woman and child wouldn't leave him be. The echo of her words, "My little one don't cost much to feed," rattled around in his head like dice in a cup. He cursed under his breath. He'd spent 10 years building a life that didn't include complications like this. 10 years forgetting what it felt like to care about anything beyond his cattle and his land. But tonight, something had cracked open inside him, and he couldn't seem to shore it back up. The moon had risen by the time he made it back to Cedar Ridge. He'd figure out what to do come morning, he told himself. For now, he'd just make sure they made it through the night. Just tonight, nothing more. But as Jake Coleman bedded down in the stable across from the warehouse, keeping watch through the long, cold hours, he had the sinking feeling that nothing in his carefully ordered life would ever be quite the same again. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Sarah Mitchell made her way down Cedar Ridge's main street once more. Emma, somewhat revived by the peaches and wrapped in the stranger's blanket, rested against her hip. The food and warmth had given Sarah enough strength to try again, though hope was a fragile thing in her chest. The Lucky Dollar Saloon was just opening its doors. the owner sweeping out the previous night's debris. Sarah steeled herself and approached. She'd work anywhere respectable, washing dishes, mopping floors, anything that didn't require what the proprietor had suggested yesterday. "Please, Mr. Hawkins," she began, but the man cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Already told you what kind of work I got available. Unless you've changed your mind about that, move along. You're bad for business standing there looking like death warmed over." At the boarding house, Mrs. Pemberton was somewhat kinder in her refusal. "Dear, I simply can't have a baby crying and disturbing my guests. You understand, don't you? Perhaps if you had someone to watch the child." But Sarah had no one. That was the cold truth of it. The seamstress shop was her last hope. She could sew. Her mother had taught her well. But the elderly woman who ran it shook her head sadly. "I can barely keep myself in business. Child, I'm sorry." By noon, Sarah found herself at the church steps, not to ask again for work. Reverend Mills had made it clear yesterday they had nothing, but simply to rest. Emma fussed quietly, and Sarah bounced her gently, humming to keep them both from crying. That's where Jake Coleman found them again. He'd spent the night arguing with himself, riding back to his ranch at dawn only to turn around again before he'd even unsaddled his horse. This wasn't his way. He didn't get involved. He'd learned long ago that caring for people only led to pain. But something about the widow and her child had burrowed under his skin like a splinter, festering until he couldn't ignore it. "Ma'am," he said, dismounting and approaching slowly. Sarah looked up, recognition and surprise flitting across her face. "Oh, it's you. Thank you again for last night. Your kindness meant everything." Jake shifted uncomfortably, his hand going to the brim of his hat. "You find any work?" The way her shoulders sagged told him everything. "No, but I'll keep trying. There's bound to be something." "There ain't." The words came out harsher than intended. "Not for a widow with a baby. Not in this town." Sarah's chin lifted, a spark of pride flashing in her brown eyes. "Then I'll try the next town. You got money for the stage?" Silence stretched between them. Emma made a small sound, reaching out toward Jake with chubby fingers. Something about the gesture made his chest tight. "Look," he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. "I got a ranch about 5 miles north. Big house, nobody in it but me. I could use someone to cook. Keep the place from falling apart. It's honest work." Sarah stared at him, hope and suspicion warring in her expression. "I don't even know your name." "Jake Coleman. Ask anyone in town. They'll tell you I'm good for my word. Keep to myself mostly. But I pay fair and I don't—" He cleared his throat. "I don't expect nothing improper. Mr. Coleman, I appreciate the offer, but people would talk. A widow and a single man. People are going to talk anyway. Least at my place. You'd have a roof over your head and food for the little one." Emma chose that moment to let out a wail, the thin, desperate cry of a hungry child. Sarah tried to soothe her, but Jake could see her own strength was nearly gone. The food he'd left last night had been a temporary reprieve, not a solution. "Where else you planning to go?" he asked quietly. "You got family somewhere? Friends?" Sarah's silence was answer enough. "Look, Mrs. Mitchell. Sarah Mitchell. Mrs. Mitchell. I ain't trying to take advantage. I need help at the ranch. True enough, my last cook quit a month ago, said I was too ornery to work for." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Place is a mess. I can offer you wages, room and board, and nobody to bother you or the child. That's all." "Why?" Sarah asked, studying his face. "Why would you help us?" Jake didn't have a good answer for that. He couldn't explain the feeling that had driven him back here, the memory of his own mother's tears when they'd lost the farm back in Missouri, before he'd struck out on his own. He couldn't talk about the loneliness that ate at him during the long winter nights, or how the sight of her holding that baby had reminded him of things he'd thought he'd forgotten how to want. "Does it matter?" he said instead. Sarah looked down at Emma, who had quieted but still fussed weakly. Then she looked back at the town that had rejected her at every turn. Finally, her gaze returned to Jake, weathered, gruff, but with eyes that held no cruelty. "I suppose it doesn't," she said softly. Jake helped her onto his horse, lifting Emma up to her before mounting behind them. Sarah stiffened at the necessary closeness, but Jake kept his manner businesslike, his hands steady on the reins. As they rode through town, curtains twitched and faces appeared in doorways. Jake could feel the weight of their stares, knew the gossip would start before they'd even cleared the town limits, but he'd weathered worse storms than wagging tongues. "That your horse?" Sarah asked, nodding toward the paint mare he'd left tied outside the stable. "Bessie, she'll follow." True enough. The mare fell into step behind them, and they made their way north in relative silence. Emma dozed against her mother's chest, lulled by the rhythm of the horse's gait. The Coleman Ranch sprawled across a valley between two mesas. Good grazing land with access to water, a small fortune in this country. The house sat on a rise, a two-story structure that had been built with ambition and hope. Now it looked a bit worn, like everything else Jake touched. "It's bigger than I expected," Sarah said. "Built it thinking." Jake cut himself off. No point in digging up old dreams. "Well, it's just me now." He helped them down, carried Sarah's meager bundle, everything she owned in the world, apparently into the house. The kitchen was a disaster. Dishes piled in the dry sink, dust on every surface. Sarah surveyed it with a practiced eye. "I'll need water heated for washing, and supplies, flour, salt, beans. What do you have in the pantry?" Jake felt something ease in his chest at her practical tone. This he could handle. Simple transactions. Work for wages. "I'll show you. There's a room upstairs you can have. Faces east so it gets the morning sun. Bed's already made up." "I'll earn my keep," Sarah said firmly. "I'm not looking for charity." "Didn't offer any?" Emma stirred in her mother's arms, looking around with curious eyes. When she spotted Jake, she smiled, a toothless, drooly grin that hit him like a fist to the gut. "Let me show you around," he said gruffly, turning away from that innocent face. The house tour was brief. Kitchen, parlor, his office where he kept the ranch books, the bedrooms upstairs. Sarah's room was at the far end of the hall from his, with a smaller adjoining room that would work for Emma. "This is too fine," Sarah protested, running her hand over the quilt on the bed. "The servants' quarters would be—" "Don't have servants' quarters. You work for me. You live in the house. That's how it is." Sarah opened her mouth to argue further, then seemed to think better of it. "Thank you, Mr. Coleman. Jake's fine. We'll be seeing enough of each other. No point in standing on ceremony." He left them to settle in, heading out to check on the hands. But as he walked toward the barn, Jake could hear movement in the kitchen, water being heated, dishes clattering. For the first time in longer than he could remember, his house sounded alive. That evening, sitting down to a simple but well-cooked meal, Jake watched Sarah move efficiently around the kitchen, Emma playing with a wooden spoon at her feet. The baby kept looking at him, babbling in her baby talk, trying to get his attention. "She's not usually so forward with strangers," Sarah said, noticing his discomfort. "I ain't much good with young ones. She seems to think otherwise." Emma proved this by crawling over and pulling herself up using Jake's leg as leverage. She stood there, swaying slightly, looking enormously pleased with herself. "Pa," she announced. Clear as day. Sarah went white. "Oh no, Emma, that's not— I'm so sorry. She's been saying that to every man she sees since—" She trailed off, scooping up the baby. "I'll teach her to call you Mr. Coleman." "Jake," he corrected automatically, though his voice sounded strange to his own ears. The weight of that simple syllable, "pa," sat heavy in his chest. Later, after Sarah had retired with Emma, Jake sat on the porch with his pipe, looking out over his land. The house behind him no longer felt empty, but that brought its own complications. He'd offered Sarah Mitchell a job and shelter. Nothing more. He'd keep it businesslike, professional. She'd save her wages, move on eventually to something better, and his life would return to its careful solitude. But as he heard Emma's distant laughter through the open window, followed by Sarah's soft singing, Jake Coleman had the unsettling feeling that he was lying to himself. Some changes, once set in motion, couldn't be undone. In the kitchen window, a lamp glowed warm against the darkness, and for the first time in years, his house looked like a home. The morning mist hung low over the valley as Sarah stepped out to gather eggs from the chicken coop. 6 weeks had passed since Jake Coleman had brought her to his ranch, and she'd settled into a rhythm that felt almost like belonging. Almost, she still caught herself looking over her shoulder, waiting for this fragile piece to shatter. Emma toddled beside her, chattering in her mix of real words and baby talk. The child had bloomed in the weeks since they'd arrived, her cheeks round and rosy, her laughter quick and frequent. She'd taken to following Jake around whenever he was near the house, calling him Pa despite Sarah's gentle corrections. "Chickens, Mama," Emma announced, pointing at the red hens pecking in the yard. "That's right, sweet girl. Let's see if they left us any eggs." The sun was just cresting the mesa when Sarah heard the approaching horses, 3 riders coming down the main road. She recognized Jake's silhouette immediately, broad shoulders, straight-backed in the saddle. The other 2 were his ranch hands, Sam Rivers and Old Pete. As they drew closer, Sarah noticed Jake's jaw was set tight, his usual morning nod absent. Something had happened in town. She was washing dishes when he finally came into the kitchen, hat in hand, dust still clinging to his clothes. "Coffee's fresh," she offered, already reaching for a cup. "Appreciated." He sat heavily at the table, rubbing a hand over his face. "Sarah, I need to tell you something." Her hand stilled on the dishcloth. "What is it?" "Went to town for supplies this morning. Seems folks have been talking." Sarah's stomach dropped. "About us? About you living here? About—" He glanced at Emma, who was playing with blocks Jake had carved for her. "About propriety and such." "I see." Sarah's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Do you want us to leave?" Jake's head snapped up. "What? No, that ain't what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying?" He sighed, looking older than his 35 years. "Mrs. Pemberton cornered me at the Mercantile. Said it wasn't Christian. Us living under the same roof without, well, said it was setting a bad example." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "We've done nothing improper. I know that. You know that. But this is a small town, and people got nothing better to do than wag their tongues." Emma chose that moment to toddle over to Jake, holding up a wooden horse. "Pa, horse!" Jake took it absently, his large hands gentle as he helped her make it gallop across the table. The gesture was so natural, so unconsciously tender, that it made Sarah's chest tight. "Perhaps I should take Emma and go to church this Sunday," Sarah suggested. "Show them that I'm still respectable. You want to do that, I'll drive you. But Sarah," he met her eyes, "don't go thinking you need to prove anything to those hypocrites. You've got more Christian charity in your little finger than most of them have in their whole bodies." The vehemence in his voice surprised them both. Jake cleared his throat, standing abruptly. "I'll be in the barn if you need anything." But he stopped at the door, turning back. "For what it's worth, this is your home as long as you want it. Don't let anyone tell you different." The rest of the week passed quietly, but Sarah could feel the weight of judgment pressing in from town. It came to a head on Saturday when she went to the Mercantile for supplies. Conversations stopped when she entered. Mrs. Pemberton and 2 other women stood near the fabric counter, their expressions pinched with disapproval. "Mrs. Mitchell." "Mrs." Pemberton said, her tone dripping false sweetness. "How surprising to see you here." "Good morning, ladies." Sarah kept her head high, moving toward the counter where Mr. Garrett waited. "We were just discussing the importance of maintaining moral standards in our community," Mrs. Pemberton continued. "For the sake of the children, you understand." Sarah's hands clenched around Emma's small fingers. "I'm sure you were." "It must be so difficult," one of the other women chimed in. "Raising a child without proper guidance, without a father figure." "Emma has all the guidance she needs," Sarah replied evenly. "Does she? Living in that house with a bachelor. What kind of example is that? Sarah turned to face them fully. The example of a good man who offered honest work and shelter to those in need. Unless Christian charity has gone out of fashion? Mrs. Pemberton's face flushed. Don't presume to lecture us about Christianity. Young woman, we know what goes on at that ranch. Do you? Then you know I wake at dawn to make breakfast, spend my days cooking and cleaning and mending, and retire to my own room each evening. You know that, Mr. Coleman treats me with nothing but respect and pays me fair wages for honest work. A convenient story. Mrs. Pemberton sniffed. Sarah felt her temper, usually so carefully controlled, begin to fray. What would you have had me do? Starve on your church steps? Watch my daughter waste away while you all gossiped about the impropriety of a widow seeking work? The women exchanged glances, but none answered. I thought not. Sarah turned back to the counter. My order, please, Mr. Garrett. The store owner filled her order in silence, but as Sarah left, she heard Emma's clear voice. Mean ladies. Mama? Hush, sweet girl. Sarah murmured, but she couldn't deny the child's assessment. She was loading the supplies into the wagon when Jake appeared, materializing from the saloon across the street like he'd been watching for her. Everything all right? His eyes were sharp, taking in her flushed cheeks and rigid posture. Fine. The word came out clipped. Jake studied her for a moment, then lifted Emma up to the wagon seat before offering Sarah his hand. His grip was warm and steady, and she held on perhaps a moment longer than necessary. They were halfway home before Jake spoke again. What did they say? Sarah considered lying, but found she couldn't. Nothing I haven't heard before. Nothing that matters. It matters if it hurts you. The simple statement undid something in her. They think. They've decided what we are to each other. Facts don't seem to matter much. Jake's hands tightened on the reins. I could speak to them, set them straight. No. Sarah was surprised by her own vehemence. That would only feed the fire. Besides, I won't have you fighting my battles. Our battles, he corrected quietly. And something warm unfurled in Sarah's chest. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Sarah found Jake on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mesas in shades of gold and crimson. I've been thinking, she said, settling into the chair beside him, about what the town thinks, about propriety. Jake tensed. Sarah, let me finish. These weeks here. They've been the best Emma and I have known since Thomas died. Maybe the best ever. You've given us a home, work, dignity. I won't let their narrow minds take that away. You sure? It might get worse before it gets better. Sarah thought of Emma's laughter, of the way Jake's eyes softened when the child called him Pa, of the quiet evenings when they sat like this, comfortable in each other's presence. I'm sure, Jake nodded slowly. All right then. They sat in companionable silence as the stars began to appear. Inside, the house was warm and bright, smelling of the bread Sarah had baked that afternoon. Emma slept safe in her bed, no longer crying from hunger or cold. Jake, Sarah said softly. Yeah? Thank you for everything. He was quiet for a long moment. You've got nothing to thank me for. You've more than earned your place here. But Sarah heard what he didn't say, that the house felt different now, lived in, that Emma's laughter had chased away shadows he hadn't even known were there, that her presence had reminded him what it felt like to have something worth protecting. The next morning, Sarah dressed carefully in her best dress, still black for morning, but clean and pressed. She pinned her hair neatly and dressed Emma in the little blue frock she'd sewn from fabric Jake had quietly left on her sewing table. We're going to church, she announced at breakfast. Jake looked up from his coffee. Want me to drive you? If you're willing. And Jake? She met his eyes steadily. I'd be honored if you'd sit with us. Something shifted in his expression. Sarah, that would only confirm what they're thinking. Let them think it. I know the truth. You know the truth. God knows the truth. That's enough for me. Jake set down his cup carefully. You sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything. And so Jake Coleman put on his Sunday best, a suit that hadn't seen daylight in 5 years, and drove them to church. When they walked in together, Emma in Jake's arms calling him Pa, clear as day, the congregation fell silent. Sarah kept her head high as Jake guided them to a pew. Let them talk, she thought. She'd found something here worth fighting for. A home, a future, and perhaps, though she hardly dared name it yet, something that might grow into more than just convenience and kindness between her and the quiet man beside her. The service began, and Emma settled against Jake's shoulder, content and trusting. Sarah caught him looking at the child with such tenderness it made her throat tight. When the collection plate came around, Jake's contribution was generous, a statement in itself. After the service, they walked out together, facing the whispers and stares with quiet dignity. And if Jake's hand briefly touched the small of Sarah's back as he helped her into the wagon, if Sarah leaned just slightly into that touch, well, that was between them and the wide blue sky above. The first snow came early that year, falling in thick, silent curtains that transformed the ranch into a world of white. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching Jake and his men drive the cattle closer to the homestead where they'd be easier to feed through the harsh months ahead. Cold. Mama, Emma said from her high chair, though the kitchen was warm from the constantly burning stove. Yes, sweet girl. Winter's here. It had been 2 weeks since their defiant appearance at church, and the cold shoulder from town had only grown colder. But here at the ranch, life continued its rhythm. Sarah had put up preserves, mended all the winter clothes, and reinforced the drafty spots around windows with rags and old flour sacks. Jake came in at midday, ice crystals in his beard, his face red from the wind. Temperatures dropping fast, might be in for a bad one. Sarah poured him hot coffee, noting how naturally he accepted it, how comfortable they'd become in their domestic dance. I've plenty of wood stacked by the stove, and the pantry's well stocked. Good. He warmed his hands around the cup. Might be snowed in for a few days if this keeps up. By evening, the wind howled like a living thing, rattling the windows and sending drafts through every tiny gap. Sarah had Emma bundled in extra layers, but the child was fretful, sensing the storm's intensity. She feeling poorly? Jake asked, pausing in his work of securing the shutters. Just unsettled by the wind, I think. Sarah bounced Emma gently, humming a soothing tune. But as night fell, Emma's fussiness turned to genuine distress. Her forehead burned with fever, and her breathing became labored, punctuated by a harsh cough that seemed to tear from her small chest. Sarah's heart clenched with familiar dread. She'd seen fever take too many children, had watched her own sister slip away despite their mother's desperate prayers and remedies. "Jake," she called, trying to keep panic from her voice. "Jake, she's burning up." He was there in an instant, his large hand gentle on Emma's forehead. His face went grim. "How bad?" "Bad. She needs willow bark tea, and I used the last of it 2 weeks ago. I meant to get more in town, but she'd been avoiding town as much as possible since the confrontation at the Mercantile." Jake was already reaching for his coat. "Doc Morrison keeps medicine at his place. I'll go." Sarah looked out at the swirling white beyond the window. The storm had become a blizzard. Visibility near zero. "Jake, you can't. Not in this. Watch me. You'll get lost. Freeze to death." "Please." He gripped her shoulders gently. "Sarah, that little girl calls me Pa. You think I'm gonna sit here while she suffers?" The fierce protectiveness in his voice nearly undid her. "Take the rope from the barn. Tie it to the porch post so you can find your way back." "I will." He grabbed his warmest gear, wrapping a scarf around his face. "Keep her warm. Try to get water into her if you can. I'll be back." And then he was gone, swallowed by the white fury beyond the door. Sarah had never known hours to pass so slowly. She bathed Emma's fevered skin with cool cloths, tried to coax water past her parched lips, and prayed with a desperation that came from the very depths of her soul. Emma's breathing grew more labored, each breath a struggle. The child, who usually chattered constantly, was silent except for occasional whimpers. Sarah held her close, rocking in the chair by the stove, and tried not to think about Jake lost in the blizzard, about being alone again, about tiny graves on windswept hills. "Please," she whispered to any power that might be listening. "Please, she's all I have. She's everything." But even as she said it, Sarah knew it wasn't entirely true anymore. Somewhere in the past months, Jake had become essential too. The thought of losing either of them was unbearable. It was past midnight when she heard it, a thump against the door. She flew to open it, and Jake practically fell inside, more ice than man. His face was blue with cold, his movements sluggish, but he pulled a leather pouch from inside his coat. "Doc gave me everything he could spare," he gasped through frozen lips. "Willow bark, laudanum for the pain. Something else, he said you'd know." Sarah grabbed the pouch, her hands shaking as she recognized the precious medicines. "You beautiful, foolish man. Let me see to Emma, then I'll tend to you." She worked quickly, brewing the willow bark tea, measuring out the tiniest dose of laudanum to ease Emma's breathing. Jake, meanwhile, had collapsed in a chair by the fire, slowly thawing. "How is she?" he asked, his voice rough. "Better, I think. The medicine will help. Jake, your hands." His fingers were white with frostbite. Sarah filled a basin with lukewarm water, knowing from experience that warming them too quickly would cause agony. She knelt before him, gently immersing his hands. He hissed in pain as feeling returned. "Worth it," he muttered. "For her." Sarah looked up at him. This man who'd risked everything for a child not his own, and felt something fundamental shift in her chest. "Jake Coleman, you're the best man I've ever known." Even through his pain, he looked startled. "Sarah, no, let me say this. You took us in when everyone else turned away. You've given Emma a home, a father's love even if you won't admit it. And tonight you nearly died for her. Couldn't let her suffer," he said simply. Sarah continued tending his hands, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I was so frightened, not just for Emma, but I couldn't bear to lose you either." The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Jake's unfrost-bitten hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing away her tears. "Sarah Mitchell, you're not losing either of us. Too stubborn to die. Emma and me both." A weak cry from the bedroom broke the moment. Sarah hurried to check on Emma, finding her fever had broken, leaving her sweaty but breathing easier. The medicine was working. She returned to find Jake had moved to the floor by the fire, creating a makeshift bed from blankets. "Figured I'd stay close tonight, keep the fire going." "You'll do no such thing. You'll take the spare room where there's a proper bed." "Sarah, that wouldn't be proper?" She almost laughed. "Jake, you just walked through a blizzard for my daughter." I think we're past worrying about what's proper, but Jake was already asleep, exhaustion finally claiming him. Sarah covered him with another blanket, then settled in the rocking chair with Emma. The child's breathing was easier now, more natural. The crisis had passed. As dawn broke, the storm began to ease. Pale sunlight filtered through the frosted windows, illuminating a world transformed by snow. Jake stirred, groaning as his abused muscles protested. "How is she?" His first thought, even before fully awake, was for Emma. "Much better. Fever's gone. Breathing's normal. Thanks to you." He sat up slowly, working the kinks from his neck. "Thanks to Doc Morrison's medicine, which wouldn't have gotten here without you." Sarah set Emma carefully in her small bed, then returned to the main room. "Jake, what you did last night, any decent man would have done the same." "No," Sarah said firmly. "They wouldn't, and we both know it." She made breakfast while Jake tended to the fire, both moving carefully around the new awareness between them. When Emma woke, demanding Pa in a hoarse but cheerful voice, the relief on Jake's face was almost painful to see. "There's my tough little gal," he said, scooping her up carefully. "Gave us quite a scare." Emma patted his cheek with a small hand. "Pa cold?" "Not anymore, sweetheart, not anymore. Over the next days, as Emma recovered and the snow gradually melted enough for the ranch to reconnect with the world, something had fundamentally changed between Sarah and Jake. The careful distance they'd maintained had been shattered by crisis, replaced by something warmer, deeper. When Sam Rivers finally made it through from the bunkhouse, he found them sitting together at the kitchen table, Emma on Jake's lap attempting to feed him porridge, all three laughing at the mess. "Well, I'll be," Sam muttered, a grin spreading across his weathered face. "About time, boss." Jake's ears reddened, but he didn't deny whatever Sam was implying. Sarah busied herself with cleaning Emma's face, but her smile was soft and knowing. That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah found Jake on the porch despite the cold, looking out at the snow-covered valley. "Penny for your thoughts?" He glanced at her, something vulnerable in his expression. "Just thinking how close we came to losing her. How quick everything can change." Sarah stepped closer, drawn by the pain in his voice. "But we didn't lose her. You saved her. Jake." "We saved her," he corrected. "Together." The word hung between them, full of possibility. Together. Not employer and housekeeper, not two people sharing space out of necessity, but something more. Something that had been growing since the day he'd brought them home. "Jake," Sarah began, but he turned to her, his eyes serious. "I know what people think, Sarah, about us, and maybe they're not entirely wrong to see what they see." Sarah's heart thundered in her chest. "What do you mean?" "I mean that somewhere between you making my house a home and Emma calling me Pa, I started feeling things I got no right to feel, and last night, when I thought I might lose you both." Sarah closed the distance between them, her hand coming to rest on his arm. "You have every right, Jake Coleman, every right in the world." The spring thaw brought trouble with the melting snow. Sarah was hanging laundry when she saw the rider approaching, a thin man in a dusty black coat, picking his way carefully up the muddy road. Something about his deliberate pace made her uneasy. "Jake," she called through the kitchen window. "Someone's coming." Jake emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. His expression hardened as he recognized the visitor. "That's Silas Garrett, the banker." Sarah's stomach dropped. Bankers rarely brought good news to small ranches. "Mr. Coleman," Garrett said, not bothering to dismount. His eyes flicked dismissively over Sarah before returning to Jake. "I'm here on business." "State it then." Garrett pulled a document from his coat. "I've been going through some old accounts. Seems the late Thomas Mitchell had dealings with our bank before his unfortunate passing." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Jake stepped closer to her, a subtle show of support. "What's that got to do with us?" Jake's voice was level, but Sarah heard the warning in it. "Mrs. Mitchell here was co-signer on her husband's loans. The debt wasn't cleared by the sale of their property. There's still the matter of $300 outstanding." "That's impossible," Sarah breathed. "The bank took everything. The farm, the equipment, even our furniture." "Not quite everything. It seems the original loan was for $500. The assets covered $200. Garrett's smile was cold. "The remaining debt follows the surviving signer. That would be you, Mrs. Mitchell." Jake's jaw tightened. "And if she can't pay? Then I'm afraid we'll have to pursue other collection methods. Garnishment of wages, for instance, or..." His eyes swept meaningfully over Sarah. "There are establishments in larger towns always looking for workers to pay off debts. Places where a woman of Mrs. Mitchell's qualities might earn enough to settle accounts quickly." The implication hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Jake took a step forward, fists clenched. But Sarah caught his arm. "How long do I have?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. 30 days. After that, legal proceedings begin." Garrett tipped his hat mockingly. "Good day to you both." After he left, Sarah sank onto the porch steps, head in her hands. $300. Might as well be 3,000. Jake sat beside her, close but not touching. "We'll figure something out." "We?" Sarah looked up at him. "Jake, This isn't your debt. You've done enough. Don't!" His voice was sharp. "Don't you dare start pushing me away now. I won't have you paying for Thomas's mistakes, and I won't—" She swallowed hard. "I won't have you think I'm staying here because I need your money." Jake turned to face her fully. "Is that what you think? That I'd question your reasons for being here? People will say, 'To hell with what people say.'" The vehemence in his voice startled them both. "Sarah, these past months, do you really think any of that was about money or debt or obligation?" Before Sarah could answer, Emma toddled out, clutching her favorite doll. "Mama sad?" Sarah forced a smile, lifting Emma onto her lap. "No, sweet girl, Mama's just thinking." "Pa, fix it," Emma said confidently, reaching for Jake, over the child's head. Sarah met Jake's eyes. The determination she saw there made her throat tight. That evening, after Emma was asleep, they sat at the kitchen table with the account book spread before them. "I've been saving my wages," Sarah said. "It's only $40, but it's a start." Jake was doing calculations. His brow furrowed. "I could sell some cattle early. Market's not great right now, but—" "No." Sarah's hand covered his. "You'll need every head for the ranch to survive. I won't be the reason you lose this place. This place don't mean nothing without—" He cut himself off. But Sarah heard what he didn't say. They sat in silence, hands still touching, the weight of unspoken words between them. The next few days passed in a blur of worry. Sarah threw herself into her work, trying not to think about Garrett's threats. Jake was often gone, riding to neighboring ranches. Though he wouldn't say why, it was Sam Rivers who finally enlightened her. "Boss is trying to drum up extra work, offering to break horses, help with branding, anything for quick cash." He shouldn't—" "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but you try telling Jake Coleman what he should or shouldn't do when it comes to protecting his own." "His own—" The words echoed in Sarah's mind as she watched Jake return that evening, exhausted and dusty, but with fire still in his eyes. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Old Pete, the eldest of Jake's ranch hands, approached Sarah one morning with an unusual request. "Ma'am, I got a proposition. My sister over in Silver Creek, she runs a boarding house, sent word she needs help for the summer season, cooking, cleaning, managing guests. Pays good, plus room and board." Sarah's heart sank. "You think I should take Emma and go?" "Lord, no!" Pete looked horrified. "I'm saying she needs someone, and I know someone who needs quick money. My sister's getting on in years. If someone were to help her out proper-like, get her through the busy season, well, she'd be mighty grateful." $100 bonus grateful, paid up front. "Pete, that's generous, but it's only a third of what I need." "Maybe, but Jake's been working himself ragged trying to earn the rest. And the boys and I, well," he cleared his throat, "we took up a collection. Ranch hands stick together, and you're one of us now." Tears blurred Sarah's vision. "I couldn't possibly—" "You could and you will. Jake Coleman's the best boss we ever had. First winter he was here, I took sick bad. He could have let me go, hired someone younger. Instead, he paid for the doctor, kept my job waiting. Man like that finds happiness, we're sure as hell gonna help keep it." That evening, Sarah found Jake in his study, ledgers spread before him, exhaustion written in every line of his body. "Pete told me about his sister's offer," she said softly. Jake looked up. "You thinking of taking it?" "The bonus would help, but Jake, I can't leave. Not now." "Not when what, Sarah?" She took a breath, gathering courage. "Not when I found home. Not when Emma thinks of you as her father. Not when I—" She stopped, heart pounding. Jake stood slowly, coming around the desk. "Finish it, please." "Not when I love you," she whispered. The words hung between them for a heartbeat before Jake crossed the remaining distance, his hands framing her face with infinite gentleness. "Sarah Mitchell, I've loved you since the day you said your little one don't cost much to feed. Loved you through every meal you cooked, every time Emma called me Pa, every moment you made this empty house a home." When he kissed her, it was like coming in from the cold, like finding shelter after a long storm. Sarah melted into him, feeling safe for the first time since Thomas had died. Maybe for the first time ever. "We'll face Garrett together," Jake murmured against her hair. "The boys' collection, Pete's sister's bonus. What I've earned this week, we're close. I'll sell my father's watch if I have to. But you're not facing this alone." "Your father's watch?" "Jake, no. It's just a thing. Sarah, you and Emma, you're what matters." A week later, they stood together in the bank. Sarah's hand firmly in Jake's as she counted out $300 onto Garrett's desk. The banker's face was sour as he wrote out the receipt. "Surprising you managed to raise such a sum so quickly," he said, suspicion clear in his voice. "Amazing what a community can do when it comes together," Jake replied evenly. As they left the bank, Sarah felt lighter than she had in months. The debt was paid, the threat removed. But more than that, she walked beside the man she loved, no longer hiding behind pretense or propriety. "Jake," she said as they reached the wagon where Emma waited with Sam. "Yeah, let's go home." He smiled then, that rare, full smile that transformed his weathered face. "Yes, ma'am, let's go home." As they drove out of town, Emma chattering happily between them, Sarah saw Mrs. Pemberton watching from the mercantile. For once, the woman's disapproving stare didn't bother her. Let them talk. She had love, she had family, she had home. The ranch came into view, golden in the afternoon sun, and Sarah felt her heart swell. Against all odds, in this unlikely place with this unlikely man, she'd found everything she'd never dared dream of. "Pa, Mama home," Emma announced, bouncing excitedly. "That's right, little one," Jake said, his arm coming around Sarah's shoulders. "We're home." The thunder of hoofbeats shattered the peaceful morning. Sarah was kneading bread when she heard them, too many horses, riding too fast. Through the kitchen window, she saw the dust cloud approaching from the south. "Jake," she called, but he was already striding from the barn, rifle in hand. Sam and Pete emerged from the bunkhouse, similarly armed. The riders came into view, 8 men, hard-faced and travel-worn, led by a man with cold gray eyes and a scar running from ear to jaw. They reined up just outside the yard, horses lathered and breathing hard. "Morning, folks," the scarred man said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Name's Wade Hutchins. My boys and I are looking for hospitality." Jake stepped forward, rifle held casual but ready. "Then you'd best ride on to town. This is private property." Hutchins' smile widened. "Now, that's not very neighborly. We've been riding hard, and we heard tell this ranch shows kindness to strangers." His gaze found Sarah in the doorway, especially pretty widows and their little ones. Ice ran down Sarah's spine. How did he know about her past? "You heard wrong," Jake said flatly. "Move on. See, that's going to be a problem." Hutchins shifted in his saddle, and Sarah noticed how his men spread out slightly. Tactical. "We've had some misfortune recently. Lost some cattle to Indians, or so we'll tell anyone who asks. Need to recuperate our losses." The threat was clear. These weren't travelers. They were raiders, the kind that plagued isolated ranches, taking what they wanted through intimidation or violence. "Pa!" Emma's voice from behind Sarah made her blood freeze. The child toddled out before Sarah could stop her, clutching her doll. Hutchins' eyes lit with malicious interest. Well, Pa, is it? You move fast. Coleman, though I can't say I blame you." His gaze raked over Sarah insultingly. "Woman like that could make a man forget all kinds of principles." Jake's knuckles went white on the rifle. "Last warning. Get off my land." "Our land. Surely?" Hutchins drawled. "Man who takes in a woman and her brat calls himself Pa. That sounds like family to me. And family shares. Doesn't it, boys?" The other riders chuckled. An ugly sound. Sarah pulled Emma back inside, her mind racing. 8 armed men against Jake, Sam, and Pete. The odds were impossible. "Sarah, take Emma to the root cellar," Jake said quietly. not taking his eyes off Hutchins. Now! But before she could move, Hutchins drew his pistol with shocking speed. Nobody moves. We're all going to be civilized about this. You're going to show us where you keep your cattle. Coleman, we'll take what we need, and nobody gets hurt. Like hell. Jake, Sarah breathed, seeing the tension in his shoulders, the way he was calculating odds. Please. Hutchins heard her plea and smiled wider. Listen to your woman. Coleman, think about that little girl. Accidents happen so easily on the frontier. The threat to Emma decided it. Jake lowered his rifle slightly. The herd's in the north pasture. Take what you want and go. Now we're being sensible. But see, cattle are heavy work. We'll need supplies too. Food, ammunition. His eyes found Sarah again. Maybe some company for the long ride ahead? No. Jake's voice was deadly quiet. No, you're not in a position to say no, friend. Hutchins gestured to his men. Burke, Sawyer, check the barn. Mason, see what's in the house. And darling, he addressed Sarah. Why don't you pack us some of whatever smells so good in that kitchen? Sarah felt Jake coiling like a spring beside her. She knew that look. He was going to do something desperate. I'll get food, she said quickly, trying to defuse the moment. Just, please don't hurt anyone. She retreated to the kitchen, Emma clinging to her skirts. Through the window, she watched two men head for the barn while another approached the house. Her hands shook as she grabbed a flour sack and began filling it with bread, dried meat, anything to make them leave faster. The man called Mason entered, his eyes roving over everything. Nice setup, he commented, then noticed the silver frame holding a daguerreotype on the mantel, the only image Jake had of his parents. He pocketed it casually. Please, Sarah said. That's not valuable to anyone, but Mason backhanded her casually, sending her stumbling into the table. Emma screamed. The sound galvanized everyone. Jake burst through the door, murder in his eyes. Outside, guns were drawn, voices shouting. In the chaos, Sarah saw their chance. Emma, run! She pushed her daughter toward the back door. Go to the hiding place! They'd established it after the winter crisis, a small cave in the hillside where Emma liked to play. The child fled, her little legs pumping. Mason lunged for Sarah, but she grabbed the hot coffee pot from the stove and flung it at his face. He screamed, clawing at his burns, and Sarah darted past him. The yard had erupted into violence. Jake and Hutchins grappled for control of a rifle, while gunfire cracked from multiple directions. Sarah saw Pete go down, clutching his shoulder, and Sam taking cover behind the water trough. Sarah, get down! Jake roared, just as Hutchins broke free and aimed at him. Without thinking, Sarah grabbed a shovel leaning against the porch and swung with all her strength. It connected with Hutchins's arm, sending his shot wild. He spun, backhanding her to the ground, but the distraction was enough. Jake's fist connected with his jaw, dropping him. The barn! Sam shouted. They're going for the horses. Smoke was rising from the structure. The raiders had set it ablaze, probably to cover their escape with the livestock. Jake's prize horses were in there. Let it burn, Jake said, helping Sarah to her feet. You hurt? She shook her head, tasting blood from a split lip. Emma's safe, hidden. More gunfire erupted as the raiders tried to flee with what cattle they'd rounded up. Jake and Sam returned fire, driving them back. In the confusion, Hutchins regained consciousness, rolling to his feet with a knife in hand. He lunged at Jake, who was focused on the other raiders. Sarah screamed a warning, but it was old Pete, wounded arm and all, who intercepted. The two men went down in a tangle of limbs. When the dust settled, Hutchins lay still, Pete's knife in his ribs. The old ranch hand sat back, face gray with pain and shock. Didn't mean to kill him, just couldn't let him. The remaining raiders, seeing their leader fall and facing determined resistance, abandoned their stolen cattle and fled. Jake sent a few shots after them to encourage their departure, then rushed to Pete's side. You saved my life, he said, pressing his bandana to Pete's wounded shoulder. Saved all our lives. Pete corrected weakly. Man threatened that little girl. Couldn't stand for it. Sarah ran for Emma while Jake and Sam tended to Pete. She found her daughter huddled in the cave, tears streaming down her face but unharmed. Pa? Emma asked immediately. Pa hurt? No, sweet girl. Pa's fine. Everyone's… She couldn't say fine, not with Pete wounded and a dead man in their yard. Everyone's going to be all right. By the time they returned, Sam had ridden for town to fetch the sheriff and doctor. The barn was a total loss. Though they'd managed to save most of the horses, Hutchins' body lay covered with a tarp. Sheriff Morrison arrived with the doctor and a posse. He surveyed the scene grimly. Wade Hutchins, been tracking this bunch for months, murdered a family over in Cooper County, robbed stages, rustled cattle. You did the territory a favor. While the doctor tended Pete's shoulder, painful but not life-threatening, the sheriff took statements. Sarah held Emma close, the child unusually quiet after the morning's terror. They knew about us, Sarah told the sheriff. About me being a widow, about Jake taking us in. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. Hutchins had a cousin worked at the bank in town, Garrett's clerk. Probably heard all about your situation there, figured you for an easy target. Jake's face darkened. Garrett. Should have known he'd be connected to this somehow. Now I can't prove Garrett knew anything, Morrison warned. But I'll be having a word with him about his hiring practices. After the sheriff left with Hutchins's body and statements from everyone, an exhausted quiet fell over the ranch. The acrid smell of smoke still hung in the air from the burned barn. Pete rested in the bunkhouse, dosed with laudanum. Sam had gone to town to hire extra hands to help with rebuilding. Sarah found Jake standing in the ruins of the barn, shoulders slumped. I'm sorry, she said softly. He turned, confusion on his face. What could you possibly be sorry for? They came here because of me, because they thought a widow and child made you vulnerable. Jake crossed to her in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms. Don't you dare blame yourself. Evil men do evil things. That's on them, not you. Pete could have died. You could have died. But we didn't. He pulled back to look at her face, thumb gently touching her split lip. We fought for what's ours, together. That's what family does. Emma, who'd been clinging to Sarah's skirts, tugged on Jake's pants. Pa brave, she announced solemnly. Mama brave too. Jake scooped her up, holding her close. Yeah, little one, your mama's the bravest woman I know. Looking at them, her daughter in the arms of this good man, standing in the ashes of what they'd defended together, Sarah felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. They'd survived this. They'd survive whatever came next. We'll rebuild, she said. Better than before. Jake's free arm came around her, pulling her into their embrace. We will. And Sarah, I think it's time we made this official. Made us a real family, in the eyes of the law and God both. Sarah's heart skipped. Jake Coleman? Is that a proposal? It's a promise, he said firmly. If you'll have me, no more wondering, no more pretending, just us, together, facing whatever comes. Emma, with the perfect timing of children, chose that moment to plant a wet kiss on Jake's cheek. Pa stay forever? Forever, little one, Jake confirmed, his eyes never leaving Sarah's. If your mama says yes. Sarah thought of all they'd been through, the cold nights in the warehouse, the hunger, the fear, the long journey to this moment, and now this man, offering not just shelter but partnership, love, a future. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Jake Coleman, forever. As the sun set over the damaged but not defeated ranch, painting the sky in shades of hope, Sarah knew that they'd won more than just a battle against outlaws. They'd won the right to their happiness, bought with courage and defended with love. The news of the raid spread through Cedar Ridge like wildfire. Within days, wagons began arriving at the Coleman Ranch, neighbors Sarah had never met, bringing lumber, nails, and willing hands to help rebuild the barn. Even some townspeople who'd shunned her came, shamefaced but determined to help. Never seen anything like it, Sam marveled, watching a dozen men raise the new barn's frame. Folks who wouldn't give you the time of day last month, working shoulder to shoulder. Mrs. Pemberton herself arrived in her buggy, bringing a basket of food and a contrite expression. She approached Sarah hesitantly where she was serving water to the workers. Mrs. Mitchell, she began, then stopped, twisting her gloves. I owe you an apology. Sarah waited, saying nothing. When we heard what happened, how you fought beside Mr. Coleman, how that little girl ran to safety because you'd prepared her. The older woman's voice cracked. I realized I'd been judging you by standards I'd never apply to myself. You're a brave woman, and I've been a fool. We all make mistakes, Sarah said quietly. What matters is learning from them. Mrs. Pemberton nodded, tears in her eyes. The ladies' auxiliary would like to help with your wedding, if you'll have us. It's the least we can do. The wedding, in the chaos of rebuilding. Sarah had almost forgotten Jake's proposal, but he hadn't. She'd caught him talking with Reverend Mills, making arrangements. That evening, as the helpers departed and quiet settled over the ranch, Sarah found Jake on the new barn's foundation, Emma asleep in his arms. They'd taken to calling her their little supervisor as she'd spent the day following the workers, chattering constantly. Wore herself out, Jake said softly, shifting to make room for Sarah beside him. She feels safe again, Sarah observed. That's because of you, because of us. He was quiet for a moment. Sarah, about the wedding, if you want to wait until things are more settled. Jake Coleman, you're not getting out of marrying me that easily. His laugh rumbled in his chest. Wouldn't dream of it. Just want to do right by you. Give you the wedding you deserve. I had a wedding once, Sarah said, thinking of her brief ceremony with Thomas, rushed, practical, born of necessity rather than love. What I want now is a marriage. With you, everything else is just trimmings. Jake's arm came around her. Careful not to wake Emma. How'd I get so lucky? I asked myself the same thing. Old Pete approached from the bunkhouse, his arm still in a sling, but his color much improved. Boss, ma'am, sorry to interrupt, but thought you should know. Sheriff Morrison sent word. That clerk of Garrett's, the one who was cousin to Hutchins, he's been arrested. Turns out he was feeding information to the gang about vulnerable targets. Garrett's claiming he knew nothing about it. Jake's jaw tightened. I'll bet he is. There's more. Pete continued. With the scandal, folks are pulling their money from Garrett's bank. Word is he might have to close up shop, maybe leave town. Sarah thought of how the banker had threatened her, the cold satisfaction in his eyes when he'd spoken of her debt. She waited to feel vindication, but found only weariness. Pride goes before a fall. She murmured. Indeed it does, ma'am. Pete agreed. Anyway, just thought you'd want to know. I'll leave you folks be. After he left, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear. The new barn was taking shape beautifully, better constructed than the old one. The community's response had transformed a disaster into something approaching a blessing. Jake, Sarah said eventually, what Pete did during the fight. He killed a man defending us. Is he going to be all right? Jake sighed. Pete's seen his share of violence. We all have out here, but taking a life, even a life that needed taking. It weighs on a man. I've been talking with him, making sure he knows we're grateful, that he did the right thing. You're a good man, Jake Coleman. I try to be, want to be better, for you and Emma. Emma stirred in his arms, mumbling something about horses. Jake smiled down at her, and Sarah's heart swelled at the tenderness in his expression. She's going to need a proper bed soon, Sarah said. She's getting too big for that crib. Been thinking the same, maybe a room with those flower curtains she keeps talking about. You pay attention to her chatter about curtains? I pay attention to everything about you both. 2 weeks later, on a crisp Sunday morning, Sarah stood in her best dress, a new blue one, made by the seamstress who'd once turned her away. The woman had insisted on creating it as a wedding gift, working late into the nights to finish it in time. Emma wore a matching blue frock with white lace, her hair braided with ribbons. She took her role as flower girl seriously, practicing her walk up and down the church aisle until Sarah had to coax her to rest. "Ready, Mrs.?" Pemberton asked, making a final adjustment to Sarah's veil. The ladies' auxiliary had indeed rallied, transforming the church with wildflowers and white bunting. "More than ready," Sarah replied. The church was packed. Every rancher for miles around had come, along with most of the town. Sarah saw the seamstress dabbing her eyes, the mercantile owner and his wife, even Doc Morrison looking unusually formal in his Sunday suit. But Sarah had eyes only for Jake, standing at the altar in a new black suit, his weathered face soft with emotion. Sam stood beside him as best man, grinning broadly. As the music began, Emma started down the aisle, scattering flower petals with great enthusiasm and occasional detours. Laughter rippled through the congregation as she stopped to show old Pete a particularly pretty petal. Then it was Sarah's turn. She walked alone, no one to give her away because she was giving herself, freely and joyfully, to the man who'd shown her what love truly meant. Jake's eyes never left hers as she approached. When she reached him, he whispered, "You're beautiful. You clean up pretty well yourself, cowboy." Reverend Mills began the ceremony, his words about love and commitment taking on deeper meaning for two people who'd already weathered so much together. When he asked if anyone objected, the church was silent. Even those who'd gossiped were now witnesses to something real and precious. "Do you, Jacob Coleman, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." Jake's voice was strong. "Certain. Do you, Sarah Mitchell, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "And do you both promise to love and cherish this child, Emma, as your own?" This wasn't traditional, but Jake had insisted. "We do." Emma, understanding something important was happening, abandoned her flower basket and attached herself to Jake's leg, earning another wave of gentle laughter. "Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Jake's hands framed Sarah's face gently, and their kiss was sweet, promising, and brief enough for church propriety. Emma demanded to be picked up, and Jake obliged, lifting her with one arm while keeping the other around Sarah. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reverend Mills announced, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Jake Coleman and their daughter Emma." The congregation erupted in applause. As they walked back down the aisle as a family, Sarah caught sight of many tear-streaked faces. This town that had once rejected her now celebrated with her. The reception was held at the ranch. Tables set up in the yard, laden with food contributed by neighbors. The new barn served as a dance floor, sawdust fresh and sweet-smelling. Jake had worried it was too simple, but to Sarah it was perfect. Their home, their land, filled with people who'd become their community. "Never thought I'd see the day Jake Coleman got married," one of the older ranchers said, slapping Jake on the back. "You got yourself a fine woman there." "Don't I know it?" Jake replied, his eyes finding Sarah across the yard where she was dancing with Emma. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Jake claimed his bride for a dance. Emma had finally worn herself out and was sleeping in Mrs. Pemberton's lap, the older woman looking utterly content. "How does it feel, Mrs. Coleman?" Jake asked as they swayed to the fiddle music. "Like coming home." Sarah answered, "How about you? Any regrets about giving up your bachelor life?" "Only regret is that I didn't find you sooner." He spun her gently, then pulled her close again. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. I've been thinking about adding onto the house, more rooms." "That's thoughtful." "Emma will need her own proper room soon enough." "Not just for Emma." He met her eyes meaningfully. "This ranch is going to need more little cowboys and cowgirls to run it someday." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "Jake Coleman, are you saying—" "I'm saying I want to fill this house with children, if you're willing. Brothers and sisters for Emma. A real family, big and loud and happy." "Yes," Sarah breathed. "Yes, to all of it." as the stars came out and the celebration continued around them. Sarah marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From that desperate night in the warehouse to this moment of perfect happiness, it seemed impossible. Yet here they were. "What are you thinking?" Jake asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "About how you saved us that night, gave us food and blankets when we had nothing." "You saved me right back," he said softly. "Gave me a reason to come home each day, showed me what I'd been missing." The fiddle struck up a livelier tune, and other couples joined them on the makeshift dance floor. Sarah saw Sam dancing with the seamstress's daughter, Pete carefully turning misses, Pemberton with his good arm, neighbors and friends celebrating not just a wedding but a community coming together. "I love you, Jake Coleman," Sarah said, her heart full to bursting. "I love you too, Sarah Coleman." He grinned at her slight start. "Better get used to it. You're stuck with that name now." "Gladly, forever." As the night deepened and the party continued, Sarah danced in her husband's arms, surrounded by friendship and acceptance, her daughter safe and loved, her future bright with promise. The morning would bring new challenges, the work of ranch life, the raising of children, the building of dreams. But tonight, in this perfect moment, Sarah Coleman knew she was exactly where she belonged. The morning sun painted the valley in shades of gold as Sarah stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching Jake teach Emma to ride her new pony. 2 years had passed since their wedding, and the ranch had flourished beyond their wildest dreams. "Careful now, little one," Jake called, his hand steady on the lead rope. "Remember what I taught you about balance." "I know, Pa." Emma, now 4 years old, sat proud and straight in her tiny saddle. Her fearlessness reminded Sarah so much of Jake it made her heart squeeze. "She's a natural," Sam commented, joining Sarah on the porch. He'd become foreman after old Pete retired, though Pete still lived in a cottage on the property, unwilling to leave what he called the only real family I've known. "Too natural," Sarah laughed, her hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. "I fear for what this next one will be like if they take after both Jake and Emma." Sam grinned. "Ranch is gonna need all the hands it can get." Speaking of which, those new cattle arrived from Denver. Fine-looking herd. The ranch had indeed grown. What started as survival had become prosperity. They'd bought adjacent land, increased their herds, and even started breeding horses that were becoming known throughout the territory for their quality. "Mama, look!" Emma called, as Jake let her take the reins herself for a few steps. "I see you, sweetheart. You're doing wonderfully." The sound of an approaching wagon drew their attention. Doc Morrison was driving, with a young couple Sarah didn't recognize sitting in the back. The woman held a baby, and even from a distance, Sarah could see the familiar signs of desperation in their postures. Jake led Emma's pony to the fence and helped her down before walking over to greet the doctor. "Jake, Sarah," Doc Morrison called. "Got some folks here looking for work. Found them camping by the creek. Baby's been sick. Thought maybe—" He let the suggestion hang. Sarah was already moving forward, her mothering instincts activated. The couple was young, perhaps 20, with the worn look of those who'd been traveling hard. The baby was thin but alert, watching everything with bright eyes. "I'm Sarah Coleman," she said gently. "This is my husband, Jake." "What's your name?" "Ben Foster, ma'am," the young man said, hat in hand. "This is my wife, Mary, and our son, James. We've come from Kansas, heading west, but—" He swallowed hard. "Work's been scarce, and with the baby getting sick—" Sarah exchanged a look with Jake. She saw the same recognition in his eyes. They'd been these people once. "Can you work cattle?" Jake asked. "Yes, sir. Grew up on a farm. I can ride, rope, mend fence, whatever needs doing. And I can cook, clean, sew," Mary added quietly. "We're not looking for charity, just a chance." Emma had wandered over, studying the baby with intense curiosity. "He's little," she announced. "Yes, he is," Mary smiled despite her exhaustion. "Just 6 months old. We have a bunkhouse room that's separate from the others." Jake said, "Decision made. Has its own entrance, Big enough for a family. Works hard but fair, and we take care of our own here." Ben's relief was palpable. "Thank you, sir. You won't regret it." As Sarah helped Mary down from the wagon, she remembered another desperate day, another kindness offered. "Come inside," she said. "Let's get you fed and settled. Then Doc Morrison can look at James properly." Later that afternoon, with the Fosters settled and baby James pronounced healthy if underfed, Sarah found Jake in his study. "You didn't hesitate," she observed, settling carefully into the chair across from his desk. "Neither did you." He looked up from the ledgers. "Seemed like the right thing, even though we don't really need more hands right now." Jake leaned back. "Sarah, when I found you and Emma that night, I didn't need a cook either. Sometimes the right thing isn't about need." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Pregnancy always made her emotional. "I love you, Jake Coleman. Come here," he said, pushing back from the desk. She moved to him, letting him pull her onto his lap, his hand spreading protectively over her belly. "How's our little rancher doing today?" "Active. I think this one's going to be just like you. Never still. Or like their mama, strong and determined." Emma burst through the door without knocking, a habit they were trying to break. "Pa, Ben showed me how to whistle. Listen." She produced a breathy, almost whistle. "Well done, little one. But what have we said about knocking?" Emma's face fell. "Sorry, Pa." She backed up, knocked on the open door, and grinned. "Can I come in?" "Yes, you may." Sarah laughed. Over the following weeks, the Fosters integrated seamlessly into ranch life. Ben proved to be a hard worker with a gift for gentling horses. Mary helped Sarah with the increasing household duties, especially as Sarah's pregnancy advanced. One evening, as they all sat down to dinner, a tradition Jake insisted on, with all the hands eating at the big kitchen table. Sarah looked around at their assembled family. Sam and Pete, the Fosters with baby James, Emma chattering away about her pony, Jake at the head of the table looking content in a way she'd never imagined when she first met him. "Grace tonight, Emma," Jake suggested. Emma folded her hands importantly. "Thank you God for food and horses and baby James and the new baby coming, and for Pa and Mama, and for making me and Mr. Garrett go away, and Amen." Jake interrupted gently as Emma showed no signs of stopping. "Amen," everyone echoed, hiding smiles. The meal was lively, full of conversation about the ranch, plans for expanding the barn again, discussion of which mares to breed. Sarah noticed Mary and Ben exchanging glances, the private communication of a couple finding their feet again after hard times. After dinner, as Sarah tucked Emma into bed, her daughter asked, "Mama, why did Pa help Ben and Mary?" Sarah smoothed Emma's hair. "Because once, when we needed help, Pa helped us, and now we can help others. Like a circle?" "Exactly like a circle. Sweet girl." Emma seemed to consider this. "I want to help people too when I'm big." "You already do, just by being you." Sarah found Jake on the porch, their evening ritual when weather permitted. The spring air was soft, carrying the scent of grass and the sound of cattle lowing in the distance. "Full house," Jake commented as she joined him. "Going to be fuller soon," Sarah reminded him, patting her belly. "Can't wait." He pulled her close. "Sarah, I've been thinking about something Pete said the other day, about legacy." "What about it?" "When I started this ranch, I thought success meant having the most cattle, the best horses, the biggest spread. But that's not really it. Is it?" Sarah waited, knowing he'd find his words. "It's this," Jake continued, gesturing to the warm windows of their home, the bunkhouse where their extended family lived, the land that supported them all. "It's taking care of people, building something that matters beyond ourselves. Like Ben and Mary? Like them, like Pete when he's too old to work, like any hand who needs a place." He paused. "Like a desperate widow and her baby who just needed someone to see them as people worth saving." Sarah turned in his arms, framing his face with her hands. "You did more than save us. Jake, you gave us life. You gave me one right back." They stood together as darkness settled over the ranch, the first stars appearing. From inside came the sound of Emma singing to her doll, Mary's soft laughter at something Ben said, Pete's harmonica playing a gentle tune. "Let's go inside," Jake said finally. "Our family's waiting." "Yes," Sarah agreed, taking his offered hand. "Let's go home." As they walked back into the warm light of their kitchen, Sarah marveled again at the journey that had brought them here. From a widow's desperate plea that her little one didn't cost much to feed, to this, a home full of love, laughter, and hope. The next morning brought new challenges. A mare was foaling. Emma skinned her knee learning to climb the corral fence, and baby James kept everyone entertained with his attempts to crawl. But Sarah wouldn't trade any of it for the world. Standing in her kitchen, watching Jake patiently teaching Ben a new roping technique while Emma helped by offering constant advice, Sarah placed her hands on her belly and whispered to the child growing there, "You're coming into a good world, little one. A world where kindness matters, where family is more than blood, where love makes all things possible." Jake caught her eye through the window and smiled, that special smile he saved just for her. He touched his hat brim in a little salute, and she blew him a kiss in return. "Mama, are you happy?" Emma asked, appearing at her side. "So happy I could burst." Sarah admitted, "Me too." Emma said matter-of-factly, "Pa says we're the luckiest family in the whole territory." "Pa's absolutely right." As the sun climbed higher over the Coleman Ranch, painting the vast grasslands in brilliant green and gold, life continued in all its messy, beautiful complexity. There would be droughts and storms, struggles and triumphs, but they would face them all together. And in the years to come, when people asked how the Coleman Ranch became the most successful spread in 3 counties, folks would tell the story of a rancher who'd taken in a widow and her child, of a love that grew from kindness, of a family built not just on blood, but on the choices people make to care for one another. But for now, in this perfect morning moment, Sarah Coleman simply stood in her kitchen, surrounded by the life she and Jake had built, grateful beyond words for the man who'd looked at a desperate woman and seen not a burden, but a blessing. "Let's go home," he'd said that first night, not knowing those 3 words would change everything. And home they had made it, indeed. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying Let's Go Home. Please share in the comments where you're listening from so we can connect. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more heartwarming frontier stories. And share your thoughts about Sarah and Jake's journey. Your feedback means the world to us.